Hello everybody, it's Kim. I'm going to say this at the very start of this video. I am processing wild mushrooms. This is not, absolutely not a recommended procedure through testing by the USDA or the National Centers for Home Canning and Preserving sites. I am using their guidelines that they would be using for domestic mushrooms, but I am going to be processing this maitake hen of the woods, basically following their guidelines. So remember, if you do not agree with this, please do not watch this video any further. This is not approved. It is at my risk and my risk only. If you choose to follow it, it is completely at your own risk. Okay? Now, I just want to make sure I put that out there for everybody to hear right from the beginning. So what I'm going to be doing is I thoroughly washed, I soaked, I washed, I cleaned. You will see I still get a few little bits and pieces of vegetation in here. But I did the very best I could to remove all grit. There's no bugs. It was soaked in a vinegar solution for several hours. And now I am bringing these to a boil for at least 5 full minutes at a full boil before I'm going to be putting them into jars. Once they're in jars, I add fresh boiling water, and then I will be processing them under pressure for my elevation for 45 minutes. This is what the National Centers for Home Canning and Preserving has recommended for domestic mushrooms. I will be very careful as I put each mushroom into the jar to look for anything that I would be concerned about. So it's going to be a lengthy process for me. Of course, you're not going to have to see all of that, but I will be looking at each individual piece of mushroom as it's placed in the jar. I'll cut them down if necessary, but I just want you to understand that this is my process, and I don't want anybody, following this if they do not consider safe canning. All right. So first step is I'm going to get these to a boil while I get my jars ready and get ready to move on to actually putting them into the jars. Okay, I have my mushrooms. They were boiled for 5 minutes. I have some fresh hot water in the back, and I have my jars sterilized and ready to go, as well as my lids and my rings have been thoroughly washed and dried. So I'm trying to find a position where you're not going to get too many shadows today. It's very rainy at my house today, and I'm just reminding you one more time, this is not approved for this type of mushroom, but it is approved for your domestic cultured or whatever you want to call it mushrooms. So I have 2 jars ready here. I'm just going to add a half a teaspoon of salt to each jar. This is optional, but I think it keeps the mushrooms looking good. And what I've decided to do, now I was stirring these mushrooms the whole time. I'm going to take some out, let them drain, because I want to look through each mushroom as I put them in my jars. I'm going to put them on this plate, which of course I have thoroughly cleaned. And I think I'm going to grab a fork because those are crazy hot. I'm going to take each piece. I'm looking for any bits like this right here. I'm not sure if that's grit or what that is. So when I see something like that, I am going to, where's my little knife go? I'm going to cut those pieces off. Doesn't mean they're bad. It's just I don't know. So I do not want them in my jars. Now I have a very clean mushroom that I can put in my jars. If they're too long, I can cut them in half. But otherwise, ooh, that's hot. Oh, man, that's hot. I can look at each one and see if there's anything that I am concerned about. And I will put these in my jars. So I'm going to fill these 2 jars, and then I'll come back because this is going to take me a few minutes, obviously. That's why I'm only doing 1 or 2 jars at a time so that I can thoroughly inspect them. You probably wouldn't have to do this with the button mushrooms, which it tells you just put them into the jars. But I want to be extra thorough here. So I know I'm going to have some safe mushrooms for my personal use. Okay, I loosely filled these. You could see I have a lot of headspace here. Headspace only needs to be 1 inch. I'm not packing the mushrooms in tight. I want a lot of that water, that boiling water, to circulate once I put it in the jars. So I'm going to add my boiling water up to about the 1 inch mark. It's hard to see with clear water sometimes. In case you want to know, this is filtered water. I do not use my well water when I can anything here. I'm going to make sure I very thoroughly debubble these because I know I'm going to get some, need to add a little bit of water. So I'm just making sure that I get all the air bubbles as much as possible out of these jars. And the mushrooms will rise to the top because the mushrooms do float. And you will be surprised how much these mushrooms cook down once I started boiling them. So set this off to the side here. My headspace is good on this one, just checking. This one's just a tad low. I'm going to add just a little bit more. A couple of drops there. All right. Now I'm going to take my vinegar and wipe off my rims really well. My lids have been cleaned very thoroughly. Those are going on my jars, and I just have to find the right rings because I have 2 different types of jars here. These pure jars will only accept their own lids, which I'm not happy with, so I'm glad I only bought 1. Okay, so now those are going back in the canner. I'm going to continue doing my jars until they're all done. So I don't want these to cool down. I'm going to place them right back in my pressure canner and let them continue to heat through while I pack up the rest of my mushrooms. All right, I have all my jars in there. They're making sure they're nice and hot. I'm going to put my lid on, turn my heat up a little bit, get these going again. I was able to get 9 half pints and 2 full pints out of those mushrooms. And I have enough left for, I'll make these for dinner or something, and I have to strain out that broth. I think I'm going to go ahead and can that broth that these mushrooms were cooked in, but I strain it very well, make sure there's no grit or anything like that in it. That way I have some extra mushroom broth to use later in the year as well. So I'm going to get these processing. Remember to steam vent for 10 minutes once it comes to a full boil, and then pints and half pints are processed for 45 minutes. They're the same time. That's why I was able to put the 2 pints in there. So anyway, I'll see you back when these guys are done. Are my gorgeous mushrooms. 1 pint or half pint, one of the small ones, did not seal. So those are in the refrigerator and they're going to get eaten. Obviously, this is the next day because I took all the rings off and everything. And in my canner right now, I have 9 pints of the mushroom broth from when I had to cook these up a little bit. So there you go. Wild mushrooms canned per the National Centers for Home Canning and Preserving, if I'm saying that right. But remember, this is not a tested recipe, so do it at your own risk. And I hope you guys can find some nice bounty this year that will help you throughout the winter. You guys have a wonderful night.